My father's roar echoed through the manor, shaking the very foundations I had spent 5 years secretly rebuilding. "You're ungrateful. Get out and don't come back!" Robert Vance screamed, tossing my luggage into the rain. I didn't utter a single word of defense. I just looked at him, feeling the cold weight of the black card in my pocket, the one currently funding his $2 million corporate debt. He thought he was purging a burden from his life. He didn't know he was screaming at his only anonymous investor. As I walked away, I pulled my funding. In 24 hours, his empire would belong to the ghosts. If you value justice and silent victories, subscribe now to witness how the shadows finally reclaim the light. Let's proceed. Nay, for 5 years, I lived as a ghost in a house of cards. To my father, Robert, I was the disappointment the son who stayed home, worked a quiet IT job from the attic, and lacked the supposed killer instinct of the Vance bloodline. He looked at me and saw a liability. He looked at my older brother Julian and saw a king. The reality was far more clinical. While Julian was busy snorting the family's remaining prestige in high-end clubs and investing in failed cryptocurrency schemes, I was the one keeping the lights on. Not with a broom, but with a keyboard. By the time I turned 26, I had built a private equity firm, Aegis Holdings, that operated in the shadows of the high-stakes financial world. 3 years ago, my father's logistics empire was 3 days away from a forced liquidation. He didn't know. He was too busy hosting gala dinners to notice the bank's foreclosure notices. I couldn't let it happen, not for him, but for my mother's memory. She had loved this estate. She had died believing this legacy would be our safety net. So, using a complex web of shell companies, I became his anonymous investor. I bought his $2 million debt, restructured his failing contracts, and funneled my own profits into his accounts just to keep his pride from shattering. I lived on coffee and lines of code in a cramped attic room that smelled of dust and overheated servers. I watched from my window as Julian pulled up in a brand new Ferrari bought with a bonus my father gave him from the very funds I had injected to save the company's payroll. Robert would brag about Julian's business acumen over expensive scotch, while I sat at the dinner table in a worn-out hoodie, listening to them mock my lack of ambition. "You have no fire, Liam," my father would say, his eyes filled with a cold, aristocratic disdain. "You're content to just exist, feeding off the scraps of this family, while Julian actually builds something. Ian." I said nothing. I just checked the server logs. I saw the $50,000 Julian had embezzled just that morning for a weekend in Vegas. I saw the late payment alerts from the utility companies that I would have to manually override before the mansion went dark. I was the silent architect of their survival, the unseen pillar holding up a ceiling that was ready to crush us all. The final straw didn't come from a financial ledger. It came from a velvet box. It was a Tuesday evening, the anniversary of my mother's passing. I went to the safe in the study to hold the only thing I had left of her custom-made emerald necklace she intended for my future wife. The safe was empty. I found Robert and Julian in the drawing room laughing. Julian was showing off a photo of a new offshore racing boat. "Where is it, Dad?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Robert didn't even look up from his drink. Julian needed liquidity for a major trade, Liam. That necklace was sitting there doing nothing. It's an investment in the family's future. Don't be so selfish. Selfish? The word felt like a physical blow. "Yes, ungrateful and selfish," he snapped, standing up to his full, imposing height. "You contribute nothing to this house. You live here for free, eat our food, and dare to question how I manage my assets. You're a parasite, Liam. A quiet, useless parasite." That was the moment the pillar broke. The anonymous investor finally decided to audit the cost of his loyalty, and the price was far higher than Robert Vance could ever afford. The night I walked out, the rain didn't feel cold. It felt like a secondary skin, shielding me from the heat of my father's rage. I didn't pack a suitcase. Everything I truly owned lived in a cloud server encrypted with a 256-bit key. As I climbed into the back of a black sedan waiting at the edge of our estate, I looked back at the glowing mahogany windows of the study. I could see the silhouette of my father and Julian, clinking glasses of scotch that cost more than a month of my supposed IT salary. They were celebrating the departure of the burden. They had no idea they had just evicted the only person keeping the ceiling from collapsing on their heads. The next morning, the silence was broken not by a word but by a digital earthquake. From my new office, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the city's financial district, I watched the first domino fall. I didn't have to hack anything. I simply stopped the manual overrides. For years, I had been the ghost in the machine. Every time Vance Logistics hit a debt ceiling, a mysterious, anonymous investor would inject capital through a shell company called Aegis Holdings. Every time Julian's reckless spending triggered a bank alert, I was the one who quietly rerouted personal dividends to cover the shortfall at 9 a.m. I sent a single 3-word email to my legal team: withdraw all support. By noon, the Vance name was bleeding out. I watched the security feeds of the corporate office. The atmosphere transformed from arrogance to anarchy in less than 3 hours. The chief financial officer, a man who had looked through me for years, was now pacing the hallway, his face a ghostly white. The credit lines were frozen. The vendors, sensing a shift in the wind, began calling in their invoices all at once. It was a $4 million heart attack that no one saw coming. Then came the messages. My phone, which had been silent for months, except for grocery lists, began to vibrate with a frantic energy. Liam, what did you do to the payroll server? Julian can't get in. Liam, answer your father. The bank just declined my corporate card at the club. This is a disgrace. I didn't reply. I just watched. I watched as Julian, the golden son, tried to bluff his way through a call with the bank. Unaware that I was the one who had bought his debt 6 months ago, he was begging his own creditor for mercy. And his creditor was the loser he had laughed at over dinner. The tension reached a breaking point when my father finally called. I picked up on the 10th ring. Liam, you ungrateful coward, he roared, his voice cracking with a mix of fury and genuine fear. I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, but the power was just cut at the manor. The bank says our accounts are under investigation because of your little shell companies. Fix this now or I'll have you arrested for sabotage. I leaned back, staring at the gray horizon. I'm not sabotaging you, Robert. I'm just letting you be the self-made man you always claimed to be. You told me I was a parasite. Remember, you told me to get out and never come back. I'm just being a dutiful son and following your orders. You're destroying everything your mother and I built, he hissed. No, I whispered. You destroyed that when you sold her necklace to fund Julian's gambling debts. I'm just the one who stopped paying for the repairs. You wanted me out of your house. Fine, but you forgot one thing. I was the only one paying the mortgage. I hung up before he could scream again. The breadcrumbs were all there, hidden in years of fine print. They were too arrogant to read. They wanted a life without me. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for, a life without my money, without my protection, and without a roof over their heads. The countdown to their final ruin had hit the 20-hour mark, and for the first time in my life, the silence was absolutely beautiful. While my father was busy screaming at the darkness in the manor, I was back in the war room, finishing the audit that would end the Vance dynasty. Revenge, I realized, isn't a hot-blooded explosion. It's a cold, clinical removal of oxygen. The SEC just flagged the Apex Solutions account. Sarah, my lead analyst, reported without looking up from her screen. Julian didn't even try to hide the paper trail. He's been moving company funds into a private offshore trust for 18 months, thinking he was diversifying the family wealth. He didn't realize the trustee of that offshore account is a subsidiary of Aegis Holdings. I looked at the digital map of the Vance empire. It was a grid of red lights. He's a predator who thinks he's playing in a forest. He doesn't know the forest is a cage I built. The beauty of being the anonymous investor was that I held the right of first refusal on every major asset my father owned. Every time Robert signed a document to expand the business, he was actually signing over pieces of his soul. By 4 p.m., I triggered the material adverse change clause in their primary loan agreement. In the financial world, this is the nuclear option, and it means the lender believes the borrower is no longer competent to manage the debt. The consequences were instantaneous and brutal because I had withdrawn my $2 million backstop. The banks didn't just ask for their money, they demanded it. Now, I spent the afternoon watching the social fallout. My father's world was built on the perception of power. But power without liquidity is just a costume. The security firm I had been paying for secretly to guard the estate called me, asking for instructions. "Pack up, I told the head of security. "Leave the gates open." Their contract expired the moment I walked out that door. By sunset, the manor wasn't a fortress anymore. It was an open target. I received a frantic video call from Julian. His eyes were bloodshot, his designer shirt wrinkled. He was standing in the middle of our father's study, surrounded by boxes. "Liam, you psycho, the police are here," he yelled, his voice cracking. "They're asking about Apex Solutions. They say the funds are missing. You have to tell them it was an internal transfer. You're the IT guy, just fix the logs." "Dad is having a panic attack, Liam. He's 65. Do you want to kill him?" I stared at my brother. The brother who had mocked me for 5 years while he stole from the very man he was now using as a shield. "I'm not fixing anything, Julian," I said, my voice echoing in my quiet office. "I spent 5 years fixing your messes. I fixed the manifest you faked. I fixed the debts you ran up. I even fixed the locks on the safe after you sold Mom's necklace. But I'm retired now. You can't do this. We're family. Family doesn't sell their mother's memory for a boat, Julian. Family doesn't call their own blood a parasite while that blood is keeping them fed. You didn't want a brother, you wanted a servant. Well, the servant has left the building, and he took the keys with him." I ended the call and watched the final domino fall. I sent a single, encrypted file to the district attorney. It contained every manifest Julian had forged and every signature Robert had blindly provided. I wasn't just taking their money. I was handing them the consequences they had been running from for a decade. My father sent one last text. It wasn't a scream this time. It was a plea. "Robert, Liam, please. They're taking the cars. The house is being taped off. Where are we supposed to go? I'm your father." I didn't feel the sting of guilt I expected. I just felt a profound sense of closure. I typed back, "Liam, you told me to get out and never come back, Robert. You said you didn't need an ungrateful son. I'm just giving you the independence you asked for. Good luck." The shadow architect was done building. It was time for the demolition. Tomorrow, the Vance Manor would be up for auction, and I would be the only bidder in the room. 48 hours. That's all it took for a 30-year dynasty to crumble into a pile of legal filings and repossession notices. The morning air was crisp and cruel as I pulled up to the gates of the Vance estate. I wasn't in my old beat-up sedan anymore. I was in the back of a midnight black Rolls-Royce. The silent hum of the engine a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding on the driveway. The scene was a digital creator's dream of pro-revenge come to life. 2 moving trucks were parked haphazardly on the lawn I used to mow. Uniformed officers stood by the front door, overseen by a man in a sharp suit holding a clipboard, the bank's liquidator. And then, there they were, Robert and Julian. My father looked like a ghost of the man who had screamed at me just 2 days ago. His tailored suit was rumpled, his hair unkempt. He was clutching a single cardboard box filled with nothing but old ledger books and a few bottles of the scotch I had bought him. Julian was arguing frantically with a deputy, pointing at a Porsche that was currently being hooked up to a tow truck. "You can't take that." "That's a gift," Julian shrieked. "It's an asset of Vance Logistics, sir," the deputy replied coldly. "And Vance Logistics is currently under emergency receivership." As my car glided to a halt, the crowd fell silent. The liquidator stepped forward, bowing slightly. I stepped out, my boots clicking against the gravel, the same gravel I had walked over in the rain when I was evicted. Robert froze. He stared at me, then at the car, then back at me. A flicker of hope, the most pathetic thing I'd ever seen, lit up his eyes. He thought the prodigal son had returned with a checkbook. He actually started to smile. "Liam," he croaked, stumbling toward me. "Thank God you're just in time. These people, they're making a mistake. Tell them who you are. Tell them you're here to settle the debt." Julian ran up behind him, his face twisting into a mask of desperate flattery. "Liam, bro, I knew you were just teaching us a lesson. We get it. We're sorry about the necklace. Okay? Just sign the papers and let's get back inside. It's freezing out here. I stood there, my hands in my pockets, watching them. The silence stretched until it became a physical weight. I'm not here to settle the debt, Robert, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the morning air. My father's smile faltered. What then? Why are you here? Why the car? Why the suit? I gestured to the liquidator, who handed me a thick leather-bound folder. I opened it, showing them the deed. I'm not here as your son. I'm here as the buyer. I didn't come back to save your house, Robert. I waited for it to hit the auction block. And I bought it for 40 cents on the dollar. Robert's face went from pale to a sickly gray. You bought the house, our house. No, I corrected him, looking up at the grand columns of the manor. I bought my house. The one I paid the mortgage on for 3 years while you called me a parasite. The one you used to scream at me to get out of. I stepped closer, leaning in so only he and Julian could hear me. You told me not to come back until I learned the value of the name you gave me. Well, I learned it. The Vance name is worth exactly 0. My name, however, my name is the one on the deed. My name is the one on the police report for Julian's apex fraud. Julian began to stammer, but I cut him off. The trucks are here for my furniture, Julian, not yours. You have 10 minutes to clear your things off the sidewalk. This is private property now. I turned to the liquidator. Change the locks. If either of them sets foot past the gate, call the police for trespassing. As I turned to walk toward the front door, Robert let out a broken, ragged sob. Liam, I'm your father. You can't leave me on the street. I paused at the threshold, the very spot where he had thrown my suitcase into the mud. I didn't look back. I didn't leave you on the street, Robert. I said, my voice a cold, final echo. You threw me out of your house. I'm just returning the favor by inviting you to leave mine. I walked inside and closed the heavy oak doors. For the first time in 30 years, the house was finally beautifully silent. 3 months later, the Vance Manor has a new name on the gate, but the same soul within its walls. I spent those months restoring the study, not with the mahogany and ego of my father, but with the quiet efficiency of the life I built. I heard through the legal grapevine that Julian is facing 5 to 7 years for corporate fraud. Robert, he's living in a small, one-bedroom apartment funded by a minimal state pension, the very pittance he used to mock when he saw my early paychecks. He calls sometimes. I don't answer, not out of malice, but because we no longer speak the same language. He speaks in status and legacy. I speak in truth. I finally tracked down my mother's necklace. It was in a high-end pawn shop in Vegas, sold for a fraction of its worth. When I held it again, I didn't feel rage. I felt a profound, cold clarity. Loyalty is a currency. I spent mine trying to buy a father's love, only to realize I was funding my own destruction. To anyone listening, don't wait for them to see your value. Build your own empire in the shadows. And when they finally tell you to get out, make sure you're the one who already owns the door. What would you do if you realized you were secretly funding the person who hates you the most? Drop a comment below.